Why Magtampo or Tampo is a gift? Okay, I am an American, married to a Filipina. This is actually my second very beautiful marriage to a Filipina. My first Filipino wife passed away very tragically in 2007. Took me a long time to recover from that. We're very close. And yes, both relationships have had tampo, okay, or magtampo. Magtampo is the act of tampo. Okay, tampo is the noun. Magtampo is the gerund, I suppose. Okay, so tampo is when a Filipina gets real quiet because she's upset and distant. Okay, and it's a signal for you to come close. Okay, it's a signal that you've done something wrong, you've done something hurtful, and she's not going to throw the first stone. She's not going to start cursing and shouting and saying hurtful things. Now, as a Christian, as a traditional Catholic, I was educated by Jesuits. I recognize in this tradition the wisdom of St. John of the Cross. And I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember the exact quote, and it wasn't in English anyway, but something like, whenever you're distressed or angry, remember our Lord on the cross and remain silent. Okay, and that's because that anger is going to damage your soul. Okay, so I'm not saying that Tampo or Magtampo comes from the Catholic Church. I'm not saying that. I'm sure it predates the arrival of the Spanish. It's something that appears in a lot of the Asian cultures in various forms. It seems to have links to Polynesian culture also. It's just something that you have to deal with when you're dealing with the culture. It's a cultural expression. Instead of shouting and throwing things and saying something that you're going to regret, a woman gets quiet. Okay? And this is really difficult. It was really difficult for me because I am a very verbal person, and a lot of Americans are. And a lot of Americans consider it a virtue to express what's going on before it gets bad. Okay, you've got to say what's bothering you. You've got to say what's upset you. You have to give me some clue. Okay, Filipinos don't work like that. Okay, at least the ones I know. So what I did is I was always a fan of Monty Python growing up. Okay, and because of my Jesuit education, I recognized there's virtue in this practice. I didn't immediately, like so many Americans I see, I didn't immediately assume that what she's doing is stupid. And that's something that a lot of Americans do. You'll hear a lot of Americans complaining not just about Filipinas, the way they talk, but also Jamaicans, mocking them. People from Bermuda, for example, I've heard Americans mocking their accent and the way they phrase things, whereas Australians or white people from South Africa are admired because of the differences in speech. Okay, there's a lot of differences between vernacular American speech in California, vernacular American speech in Texas, and vernacular American speech in Australia. But you'll never hear white Americans mocking people speaking these differences. Maybe a little bit, okay, but not with the kind of harshness that they do Filipinos. But not only Filipinos, Jamaicans, other people, but it's a racism. It really is an expression of racism, okay? And I think the way Americans react to this Magtampo might be racism also, okay? Because if you're raised in a traditional Catholic environment, you're going to immediately recognize there's some virtue here, okay? She's getting quiet. She's not going to say things that are going to hurt the relationship. She's not going to say something hurtful, okay? She's going to be quiet. She's going to make me come after her. So one thing I did as a fan of Monty Python growing up is I'll try and put a link in the description to the Monty Python Department of Silly Walks. And this is just brilliant, just physical comedy, slapstick comedy from this comedy group, Monty Python. And I was a fan of them, and I knew these silly walks, and I'd practiced many of them, and that is the nuclear option for Magtampo. Whenever my wife would do Magtampo, I'd just start doing a silly walk, and this evolved into a variety of silly dances. Uh, and it's a humor that immediately disarms the Magtempo and just completely shuts it off. And then from there, once I get her laughing, we're dancing and dancing, slow dancing, and then making jokes about where's the music or something, and then maybe maybe the next day, maybe a couple of hours later, I'll talk to her about what is it that really bothered you, and then she'll be able to talk. Okay, but you can't force people to do this. If they don't want to talk, let them be silent and buy her something, buy her some flowers or something. There's virtue in this. It's really, this Magtampo is a gift, okay? Now, one thing the Asian culture really is very gentle. And you'll see this when you go to the Philippines or you go to Japan. I was in Japan for a while, even though I was only 11 years old in 1977. I still remember a lot of it. And that's one thing that struck me, is how gentle these people were. There's a gentleness to the culture, and this Magtampo is an expression of that. Whereas Americans come from this English culture that was dominated by the Vikings and the Normans and some very cruel people. And there's a coldness, there's a cruelty to English-speaking people. There really is, especially when you compare it to Latin-speaking people. I noticed that immediately when I moved to Texas. All the Mexican kids I saw were quiet, and the American kids are just crying. Why? Because the Mexican kids are sleeping with their parents still. There's a lot of physical affection there. This is my theory. It's my belief. And the American kids are locked up in a room by themselves and ignored. And that's the way Americans are, a lot of them. I've since found a lot of Americans that are not that way. One of the firefighters, who's this real macho weightlifter guy that I worked with, was sad one day, and I was asking him what it was, and he said, well, his son's starting school. His son's starting first grade. He's no longer in kindergarten, and he and his wife are trying to get him to sleep in his own room, and it's hard, and it really weighs on him. And I said, wait a minute. You mean he's just starting first grade now, and up until now, he's been sleeping with you and your wife? And he looked at me kind of with these sad eyes, this big, muscular weightlifting guy, this macho guy from Chicago. And he had these sad eyes, and he said, well, he cries. And that's just perfect. That's like somebody from a Latin culture. And these kids are really quiet and gentle because of that added affection. And the Philippines has that, okay? I don't know if it's from the Latin or the Asian culture, but this Magtampo is an expression of that. Man, I've got a lot of anecdotes for American women that are very cruel and Filipino women that are not. But this is something that can really drive American men crazy. But if they're from a conservative Catholic background, they're going to recognize the virtue in it. There really is. This Magtampo can really be a gift. It really can.